Greetings, everyone. My name is Amy Liu, and I am Vice President of Brookings and Director of the Metropolitan Policy Program, and it is my distinct pleasure to be hosting this panel discussion today. The goal is to learn about how to unlock the power of diversity from a few industry leaders, including the role of partnerships. Now, by way of background, I lead a program at Brookings that collaborates with local leaders to create prosperous, just, and resilient communities. And I've had the opportunity in this role to engage with CEOs and business leaders in advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and inclusive economies in their home regions. I also happen to be a board member of Just Capital, which is a nonprofit committed to stakeholder capitalism. Now, in the past year, we have seen dozens of corporations make public commitments to racial justice causes. However, according to a report released by McKinsey at the end of last year, at the end of 2020, few of those public commitments have resulted in meaningful change. Specifically, in a review of 1,000 corporations, McKinsey found that 32% of those companies made public statements in support of racial justice, but a smaller segment, 22%, converted those public statements into external actions, such as greater philanthropic giving. However, an even smaller share, just 18%, went further, making changes inside their firms, whether it's in board composition, procurement, or other business practices. In other words, despite the accelerated visibility of actions towards DEI in the past year, there is much more work that can be done by business, by industry leaders to make diversity, equity, and inclusion a meaningful value and competitive proposition for firms and society. So to give us some words of wisdom in this corporate moment, I am joined today by Herman Bowles and Mark Brown. Herman is Vice Chairman Americas of JLL, which is a global real estate services firm. And Mark is a former corporate vice president, corporate development at Microsoft, and today recently became partner at EQ2 Partners, which is a global asset management firm. So welcome, Herman and Mark. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I want to open this conversation with just a broad, get your feedback on the broad set of sense of play in your industries. Herman, in a broad level, you represent a leader in the real estate sector. Mark, you know, in some ways, at least previously, worked in the tech sector. Herman, let's start with you. What's the overall state of play on DEI within your industry 1 year after the murder of George Floyd? And where do you see some of the most promising actions to embed the values of diversity, equity, inclusion in companies in the real estate sector?
Well, Amy, thank you very much for that question. I want to thank CalPERS for pulling this event together. This is my second opportunity to participate. And as a major investor, and that's probably what I'm going to talk about, the power that major investors have actually to impact and affect change. So you ask about the real estate industry. As an industry, we have a lot of challenges as it relates to diversity, and this includes both women and people of color, to include specifically Black people and Hispanic. And the reason for that in real estate, and I think Mark will probably have some of the same things from his investment management area, is real estate is a relationship business. And particularly historically, it's been controlled by families. And it's, somebody, you get a deal done. And even though corporations are involved in it now, that relationship component of it is still there historically. Now, what has happened since the George Floyd incident around the world, right? Everybody is more aware. There seems to be more of a consciousness that's going. But I'll tell you what I see changing in the real estate in companies such as Mark's former company, Microsoft, is a perfect example. When companies demand that there be representation, not only in one way in terms of the firms that they do business with, but also because you can't always do business with a minority firm, right, or women-owned firm. So the other issue is, when I do business with this majority firm, who are the people that are doing that business for and with me? And what firms have started to do is they said, don't look at me as to where I am now. I am telling you what my aspirational goals are. And what I want you to do is I want you to mirror my aspirational goals. And I'll tell you what that does within a company, particularly a services company. People are going to run back and they're going to say, hey, I need someone to put on this account, and not just in a position to show a face, but a meaningful position that will help their professional development. And one thing I'll say that I'm doing, and I'm fortunate to serve on quite a few corporate boards, and on one where I'm on the audit committee, I am asking the auditors, obviously they report to the audit committee, to come in and say, hey, I see 3 white females and 3 males come in here every quarter. Tell me about the rest of the team and who is helping to put this together. And they say, oh yeah, we're diverse. And I'll tell you what I do, and I've done this in 3 companies now. Say, what I want to see every quarter when you come in here, show me the picture diagram of the people that are behind this. And I can tell you what that does is that creates opportunities. People don't get up and say, I'm going to be bad today. People generally get up and say, I want to try to maximize my day. And it's a matter of prioritization in terms of what am I going to put, particularly in diversity, equity, inclusion. And what the George Floyd incident has done, it's shown a light on it. And we are doing better. I mean, our firm, we were recognized based upon primarily our board representation as one of the most diverse firms in the nation. But I tell my colleagues, said, please don't rest your laurels on that, because we still have a lot of work we can do, particularly in our senior positions. And obviously want to keep that pipeline going as well. But real estate has a way to go, and JLL is gonna try to lead the way doing that. But what is going to hasten that is our clients demanding that action and participation.
That's exactly right. So Mark, thank you, Herman. Mark, let's hear from you. What's your sense of the state of play, both in the tech side and now as a new member of the global asset industry?
I think both are similar, in that I see progress, for sure, on multiple dimensions. And I think about it not only on the hiring side of things, and there are pockets where that's not necessarily true. There are probably in the industry as a whole, not just Microsoft, but in the industry as a whole, there's probably less diversity on the engineering side of the technology industry than one would want to see, or that is representative of the population as a whole. And we need to be careful about that, the finance organization and the legal organization and the support organizations don't allow there to be less people on the engineering side. Because I think what we do know, and what the research shows, is engineering teams, like other teams, make better decisions when they're diverse. They make better products. They make products that are more representative of the vast variety of users, et cetera. So having that diversity on the engineering side is going to be important. But I don't think it stops at just hiring. It has to address retention. It has to address promotion. And those are 2 areas, longer in duration, that I think the judgment is still out on not only the technology industry, but the asset management industry as well. We have to let those people move through the system. And I see progress along those dimensions, but I'm waiting to ultimately see that the top ranks are filled with diversity of all kinds as well. And that's going to take some time, and hopefully we'll get there. And the underlying bits that are important that I think help, and certainly true at Microsoft, certainly true at EQT, you have to have a culture of systemic change, a culture that's open to moving forward along these dimensions. I will call Satya out on this. He was a magnificent leader in that regard, in changing the culture to be open to what it meant to be diverse on all dimensions, again, throughout the ranks. And then you need not just that talking head at the top, but you need a leadership team that is actually open and honest about the conversation, both in terms of the recognition and then how it's going to be addressed over a long period of time. And so there's a bunch of efforts that are going on, again, inside EQT, that certainly went on inside of Microsoft, that I'm really excited about seeing the fruits and benefits of, including things that are sort of been benefited through the pandemic, which is pulling in talent from across the world, and living with that notion that people can be located in a variety of different locations. That broadens the spectrum. That allows you to not rest on the "we can't" finds and the we can't" attracts. Those excuses go out the window now, and so set up for change. We're going to have to see if it actually comes to fruition. And then to Herman's point, we're going to have to hold all of us accountable. I think of it as a two-way street to see that change comes to fruition.
I want to ask you both as a follow-up, this notion of having a culture of systemic change. I think that's really important. And I think that this past year, there's been a great awareness that there's been chief diversity officers in many companies, and we have not been able to retain many of them, or they feel that the efforts haven't been very deep. And I think there's a judgment now about the progress that companies are making. In your mind, what does a culture of systemic change look like, besides just the appointment of a chief diversity officer?
Well, I'll start on that. I think diversity is a business imperative. And let me tell you what I mean by that, Amy. If we look at what's happening to America, and sometime between 2035 and 2040, and Brookings has done some of this research, the majority of America is going to be people of color. So as I'm in boardrooms, as I'm at jail, as I'm everywhere, you think of yourself, as that great philosopher Wayne Gretzky says, you have to skate to where the puck is going to be. So if you think of that, where the demographics are heading, then you ask yourself, who am I going to hire? What products am I going to make for the markets? Who is going to sell those products to the market? So from that, you don't tell people you need to be diverse because it's a nice thing to do. We do that in church. And one of my favorite saying is people have been going to church for thousands of years, but somehow we came out and we had atrocities that are committed. So it's not just the moral aspect of it that it's going to perhaps make change. But what will make change, I'm convinced, is the economic aspect of it. So as I said in boardrooms, and I think about, as we look around, board members, you have to be able to look around the corner, right? That's the best thing you can do, anticipate. It's not what happened yesterday, it's what's going to happen tomorrow, and is the management team ready for that? And as we think of diversity and you understand what is happening there, and the point Mark said, that diverse teams make better decisions, that's been proven over and over and over again, you make it a business imperative. And this where I get to where to get people on the same sheet of music is, you have to answer the question, why are we doing what we're doing, right? Because we all come to everything we do with our unconscious biases and our experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And if we don't go through that analytical process to say, why are we doing this? And it's important for leaders to model the behavior that is necessary, but you're doing it for the long-term benefit of the organization. And I think some of the systematic change will come as a result of whether regulatory, and we all know the board law, for example, in California, right, where they mandated females, and now they're going to other disadvantaged groups to be on boards. Okay, that's certainly one way to do it, but you still got to understand what is the why. We're all humans. We all question what we're doing, and if we can get that alignment of the why, that it's better for everybody. And we've got to get out of the idea that it's a zero-sum game. The idea is we have to make the pie bigger where everyone is better off.
Mark, you want to add?
I couldn't have said it better than Herman said it. And I'd only add and underscore really that employees are, in most companies, are your greatest asset. And you have to, I think, do what you can to maximize their well-being so that they can be the best people that possibly can be for you as a company when they come to work, when they're doing work, when they're in front of customers. And to do that, just like if there was a an earthquake in Puerto Rico or a flood, where you would want to know that your employees are okay. That's the same mentality I think we should broaden and take to everything related to our employees, all of our employees. We should take care of them in that manner, from that framework. And that would just go to underscore what Herman said so eloquently.
Mark, let me stay with you and ask you a question about talent. You said earlier in your opening statement how important it is that we create pathways for leadership, not just among engineers, but in other key positions, particularly around product development of all kinds. And Herman, you obviously talked about leadership at the highest levels as well, executive teams, decision-making teams, things like that. So Mark, how, well, at least when you think about the private equity industry, what is the best way to cultivate leadership and diverse leadership and retaining diverse leadership in that industry?
It's a great question, and it goes back to the three areas I mentioned earlier, where hiring is awesome, and it starts there, right? If you don't have a wide, diverse set of people coming in the top of the funnel, you're never going to get the leadership and opportunities at the tail end. And there's no silver bullet. Would be the ultimate answer that I would have. But you have to start in on it. You have to realize to retain people is just different. It's different by individuals. And you have to push yourself to recognize that the problem actually may be you, not the person. That you need to change, again, to make them see their full potential, which will benefit your organization in the end. And I think that's, again, where you change that lens to have the focus on the person, the individual, is really helpful. I'd also sort of underscore what Herman was talking about earlier, where pushing your suppliers, the law firms, the banks, the LPs, let's hold each other mutually accountable for, again, not only the hiring part, but for the promotion and leadership part as well in both of our organizations. We should be doing the same thing for our portfolio companies, where, again, it's not just the boardroom, but we need a diverse set of people throughout the organization. And we're focused on it from an EQT perspective, but we need to continue to do that and not believe that just because we've sort of checked the box at the ESG board level, that somehow we've accomplished all that's possible in terms of diversity throughout the organization.
Let's talk about partnerships. Let's go to you, Herman, because that is a big part of the panel discussion today. I do think that individual corporate action is really important, but to get to scale, I think we need a partner and do things collectively. In your mind, what are some of the most effective partnerships that industry leaders or companies can forge to make good on their commitments to DEI?
Well, one of the things that happens every year, there's a conference called the Black Directors Conference. Melanie Hobson and John Rogers are the primary sponsors of it from Ariel Capital. And one of the things we talk about, we get the most senior Black board members from Fortune 500 companies together. And obviously, we all understand what our fiduciary responsibility is to shareholders, right? But we also think about the stakeholders, which includes the employees and the people in which where we operate. And we talk about the partnership, and I want to talk about it in two senses. And the first one is 3 Ps we talk about. We talk about the people, and from that, it means the people not only in the boardroom, in the C-suite, and getting to the point Mark made about the funnel, okay? And we can ask, as a board member, we can ask those questions, right? You can ask questions. That I tell people, being a board member, it may appear hard. It's actually easy because you don't have to answer questions because, right, nose in, hands off, but you do have to ask questions. So that's the first P. The second P, Mark, you mentioned as well, is philanthropy, okay? Asking the question, right? That's another partnership. Who, in addition to the traditional charities and events that we support, are we looking from a social justice nature for the organizations that we support? Okay. And then the third we talked about earlier is procurement. We've kind of put that one in, but not only in terms of looking for women and minority organizations. And John Rogers loves to talk about the fact that, people get in a million round table and they're out buying garbage, pest control, painting and construction. And we know these are sort of lower margin, not wealth building type functions that people can do. And asking the question, a good friend of mine that's going to retire pretty soon, we're talking about the accounting firms, the real estate firms, the advertising firms, your insurance brokers, your lawyers, your accountants, et cetera, et cetera. And then to the extent, again, as I said earlier, if you don't have a minority firm you can partner with, one great CEO friend of mine, he basically got the word, he handles the accountants, he handles the lawyers, he handles the investment banking. And if you came in to have a meeting with him and you came in, let's just suppose, with 4 white males, he would basically say, when you're ready to have a meeting, come back with an organization that you have that represents my aspirational goals. So the word got out very quickly. So those are the partnerships. So you think of these partnerships, don't think of them as just business to business. You can establish a partnership by putting your processes, your values, and your goals in place that encourages people who want to do business with you to align with what your objectives are.
And Herman, I want to stay with you and ask about your board engagement, because so many of these partnerships and decisions and commitments to the DEI needs to start at the very top. And I am just curious, how has the board conversations evolved in the past year? And do you see what are some of the most promising changes you're seeing in the board conversations?
The board conversations have definitely changed for the positive. And as I look out, I've been doing public boards for over 20 years. And, much of the time, most of that time, I've been, the only person of color in the room. And you have to, I tell people that are doing this, you can't just go in and be, quote unquote, the woman director or the Black director. You have to be a director. And what that means is that you have to have a foundation of business and the ability to evaluate the corporation, ask those questions that I talked about that are meaningful. And if you think about it, every board puts together a board matrix, and you're looking for somebody that's an expert in some of these areas. And if you'll note, whether you're the finance expert or the technology expert or the cyber expert, that's going to just be 10 to 15% of the time of the conversations. So the other 85% of the time, you're evaluating and you're voting on and you're questioning things that are not perhaps your primary expertise, but you're on that board because you have this ability to have a general review of something and ask the questions to get the right decisions. And what I've seen happen, there's no doubt about it. And I've been a proponent of diversity from gender and ethnicity, my entire life, just based upon my life experiences growing up in Alabama. Now, I don't think I'm doing anything different. However, the ability to have those discussions is much more impactful now, because again, part of it is the atrocity that occurred with George Floyd. Part of it is the fact that the news is staying on it. The news cycle, normally these things, right? Rodney out in California, right? 6 weeks, that news cycle was gone. This has been over a year and we're still here, and people are kind of demanding that wrongs at least be righted. So the board responsibility is to ask those questions, to hold the CEO and the senior management team accountable, and doing it in such a way that it is not antagonistic. You've got to build on the successes. And I often get asked this question, well, should XYZ company be doing ABC? And the answer to that is, I don't know. Every company is starting from a different point in this journey. And if you go out and there's a little progress and you slap them on the hand because that's not enough progress, that may not be the right thing to do. Everything is relative to where they're starting, but you have to have this concept of continuous improvement, accountability, and consequences for action.
Mark, prior to our session today, we talked a little bit about one of the most inherent tensions within the asset management industry when it comes to the commitment to diversity, which is this tension between portfolio performance and promoting diverse talent. What do you make of that tension, and how should leaders navigate that?
Well, it's a very interesting question. And as we talked a little bit about before, it won't surprise you to hear me say we have to beat back against the premise. It is the false premise. And we talked a little bit about it before. The diverse teams making better decisions, documented, we move on. Diverse teams making better product decisions, making decisions that are making products, AI, other software in the technology space that is more representative of the people who are in the community, who are going to be the users, et cetera. So we need to beat back against the premise, because I think if you get caught in that dichotomy at the very beginning, it becomes a bit of a lost cause, because you can't win that battle. What I think again, it goes back to is we can't let the we can'ts overwhelm the system. And so performance, diversity are joined at the hip. They aren't opposed to each other. So whether it's in the hiring, the promotion, all of the different processes there, or in portfolio performance and returns, picking managers, finding managers. The VC industry is where it is now, but a lot of firms were first-time funds at some point. A lot of firms that are 15, 20 years old now were first-time funds at one point. The whole industry was a first-time fund at one point. So you can't say that, forever I don't want to invest in first-time funds. So there are a bunch of we can'ts that sort of get caught in the system that, because we've allowed them to exist, can hold one back. So I think some of those things need to be erased, and a clean slate, so to speak, needs to be put in place to evaluate firms, to evaluate investments, to evaluate portfolio managers across the board.
So we have just about 3 minutes left. So I want to just close with a final question for both of you. I think the audience in this room or Zoom are leaders of all different levels within their companies. And there is greater awareness for sure in the past year about the importance of embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what's the advice you have for leaders, for managers, for employees that are tuning in? What can they do in this moment to make sure that this industry really moves towards this cultural system of change?
I'll start. Okay, if you look at, and again, I think Brookings has some of this research, Black income is approximately 60% of the average white person. Mm-hmm. Now let's go to the net worth. The net worth of a Black person is approximately 10% of that of a white person. And we know this goes all the way back from slavery and redlining and Jim Crow laws, et cetera, et cetera. So there have been reasons that this disparity exists. And the issue is, how is it that we create an environment, create an America where everyone can thrive? And the point, there's a picture real quickly that some consultants use of people looking over a fence and saying, everything's supposed to be equal and everybody gets the same opportunity. And that's really true in terms of the fact that we do want to have a society where people are rewarded for what they do. However, at the same time, we have to recognize and take the opportunity to give people an opportunity to make themselves better. So as we look at the investment industry that we talk about, I happen to be on the Real Estate Advisory Council at New York State Teachers. We're not as big as CalPERS, but we're pretty large. And what we are doing there in terms of going out, making sure that our investment managers are, even in their advertising. I mean, we had one of our people came up and they're sort of almost in an inner city and they put their marketing material out and there was not one Black person in the marketing material. You just have to say, well, what is going on? And that's because they didn't have somebody in the room. They didn't do that on purpose. They didn't say we want to make you angry. But again, that consciousness to make sure that you have people in the room that can give you a perspective that will help you make a better decision.
Mark, 30 seconds.
I'll be brief. I think we need action. Don't let the perfect get in the way of you acting. I think we've talked about it several times about the importance of it. But we need actual action now, whether that's on the hiring, promotion, retention side, whether that's on the supplier diversity side, whatever it may be, act.
Great, thank you so much. I know we just scratched the surface of this big historic topic, and what I walk away with, we need deep commitment for Herman, and we have to have agency, as what Mark said. So I want to thank you both for this really great conversation, and I am now going to turn it over to Marlene, who's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at CalPERS, to lead us to the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.